UFC 307, Pereira versus Rountree. The UFC heads to Salt Lake City, Utah for this weekend's pay-per-view. Should be a pretty solid card, going to be at altitude, so all that has been taken into consideration with the breakdown for each of these fights. Should be a really solid card. Hopefully, these fighters have been training at altitude, getting their cardio up, because in past years we've seen guys just gassing out left and right because they just were not ready for the altitude. Hopefully that's not the case. Let's get right into this breakdown, starting with our first fight of this event. It's McGee taking on Tim Means. Both these fighters, obviously at the tail ends of their careers, both approaching 39 and 40 years old. Tim Means is the fighter with the more recent win here. He got a win over Andre Fialho last year. Found a KO. It's a tough one to pick between these two. I think Tim Means does have his grappling that he can sort of rely on that might be able to give him an edge that McGee might not have. For that reason, we're going to take Tim Means by decision. Next fight is Carla Esparza versus Tecia Pennington. Esparza obviously was schooled by Zhang Weili. We all saw it, but I think people forget that prior to that, she was on a 6-fight win streak. However bad that Rose Namajunas fight was. I do think this has already been confirmed as her last fight. So that leads me to question kind of how locked in and how prepared she's going to be. Obviously, I don't think she's ever been someone to show up not prepared to fight, but it's just got to give you a different mentality, thinking, hey, this is the last one. Who knows? Maybe she'll come and really be looking to make a statement. Ticia's 3-2 in her last 5 fights. Another one which was really tough to pick between here. Ticia's very solid. I think she'll have the grappling to ward off Carla Esparza's takedowns. We're going to take Tecia Pennington by decision. How often do you really see fighters win their retirement fight? It just does not happen very often. Tecia, obviously, her wife Raquel is fighting later on here. We'll see what the pick is there. More to come later, but perhaps both will win. Let's see. Before that, though, we got to talk about Ryan Spann and Ovince Preux. Spann is coming off of a KO loss to Bogdan Guskov, a fight that we took Guskov in because Ryan Spann, to me, just does not have the consistent enough striking to really be successful at 205. He likes to mix in the grappling a bit. He's a opportunistic submission specialist. Like, he'll pull a guillotine out every once in a while, but I think you need hands to succeed at 205, and he just seems to kind of be afraid to let his go. We saw him get KO'd by Bogdan Guskov. OSP is a guy who I think is going to be able to test him on the feet, although, of course, OSP is coming up on 40 years old, if he's not already 40. Don't know how many fights he's going to have left, but we know that he's skilled on the feet. We know that he has had power. He hasn't gotten a KO since 2024, but power, I think, is one of the last things to leave these guys, especially at 205. I think he can give Ryan Spann a lot of trouble on the feet. We're taking OSP by decision. Next up is a matchup between Cesar, Almeida, and Ihor Potieria. Almeida is a kickboxing specialist. Potieria is a MMA striking specialist, but without all of the skill, I'd say. He's a guy who I think you can get a really solid about half of a round out of Ihor Potieria where he's really dangerous. And after that, he just kind of doesn't have enough juice left to really give his opponents much trouble. Almeida's been kickboxing for so long. He's training with guys like Alex Pereira. He's putting in the work. And I just don't think Potieria is going to be able to really mix in the grappling enough to frustrate Almeida. Almeida did lose to Roman Kopylov, but he did have a lot of success in that fight. I think although he's up there a bit in age, I think he's still growing as a mixed martial artist because he's fresh in the sport. I think he finds a KO over Potieria. Next fight is Austin Hubbard versus Alexander Hernandez. Another toss-up. Hernandez is 1-4 in his last 5. He's a guy who he has some power on the feet. I think he has that going for him, but just hasn't really put it all together as of late. Hubbard hasn't shown a whole lot lately either. He is coming off of a win before that. We saw him get triangle choked by Kurt Holobaugh in the tough finale, one of the more forgettable tough seasons to date. I think for this one, Hernandez, his best moments have been better than Austin Hubbard's best moments. And for that, we're taking Hernandez to win this one. I think there's a good chance he could find a KO. He's just due. It's really as simple as that. I think he's due. Next up is Marina Rodriguez versus Iasmin Lucindo. Rodriguez going through a bit of a skid. Obviously, she's been in the game for a while. I think she's in her upper 30s. Taking on the young gun, Iasmin Lucindo, who's only 22 years old. Unlike other fighters at her age, Lucindo already has 4 fights in the UFC. She's 3-1. That being said, Marina Rodriguez, I just really like to err on the side with the more experience. Iasmin Lucindo, she's gotten some of that cage time in, but really, how long could she possibly have been training for? She's just 22 years old. Rodriguez, we've seen her beat some really tough people in the past. I think she's got wins over like Yan Xiaonan, and she's got some big wins. I think Marina Rodriguez wins this one by decision. I think she's going to fight the smarter fight between these two. Next up, it is Stephen Thompson taking on Joaquin Buckley. Not really sure if Wonderboy has the power to keep Buckley off of him for 15 minutes. I think Wonderboy of old, kind of at his peak, if he caught you coming in, he just sat people down. We haven't really seen that from him. Obviously, he had the KO win over Kevin Holland, who's fighting on this card later, but that wasn't really like one shot put him down. That was just like more of a sustained beating. Holland had broken his hand. Wonderboy fought a pretty much perfect fight. Buckley, I think he has the skills both on the feet and the power to really frustrate Wonderboy. And he does have that wrestling background as well. It's not like Wonderboy can't fight off a takedown, but Buckley was able to take down Ruziboyev, a guy who's had a decent amount of success at middleweight and really showed a complete MMA skill set in that fight. I thought it was his most impressive win to date. Buckley obviously had the win over Vicente Luque as well, so I think he's kind of on the rise a bit as of late. He's been looking good. The move to 170 has definitely suited him. Wonderboy, he's always going to be in a fight. And if Buckley messes around on the feet too much, I definitely think Wonderboy is going to give him some crazy looks, stuff that Buckley hasn't seen before. But I think Buckley ultimately finds a decision win here. Mixes in the grappling. He's going to have quick hands, a lot of power. I think he gets a decision win here. Next up, it is the main event of the prelims. It's Ketlen Vieira taking on Kayla Harrison. Harrison has obviously built a big name for herself after just one UFC fight. Really showed out in that debut. Got the KO win over Holly Holm, which is exactly what we all wanted to see out of her in that fight. She impressed me a ton. I was definitely skeptical about her coming in. Obviously, we know she can grapple with anybody in the world. She's got 2 gold medals to prove that. But she was coming, on the heels of that loss to Larissa Pacheco, where she did kind of get dominated. That being said, obviously she's fighting 135ers in the UFC rather than, I think it was a 145 or maybe even a 155 fight versus Larissa Pacheco in the PFL. I think the ability to use elbows has really unlocked a new sort of technique that she's been able to use. We saw her just unleash them on Holly Holm, and it was super effective for her just because she's so good at getting top position and just smothering people. I'm definitely a bit worried about her overlooking Ketlen Vieira. Vieira is 8-3 in the UFC. That's a lot of experience. There's no doubt that I think she's faced a higher quantity of quality opponents compared to Kayla Harrison in MMA. Even though Kayla Harrison is 17-1, you have to question who she's been fighting. So Vieira, I could see her definitely frustrating Kayla Harrison, but ultimately I think Kayla's too big, too strong. She's going to take Vieira down and just start smashing her. I think Kayla wins this one by ground and pound KO. Our first fight in the prelims is Roman Dolidze taking on Kevin Holland. Holland is back at middleweight. Don't love that for him. I think if he was serious about fighting for a title one day, he would be fighting at 170 where he's just fighting guys his size. You can just tell, looking back on some of his middleweight fights, that he's just a smaller guy. He's got a much more slender frame. Dolidze, I think, is going to be able to outmuscle him in this one. Definitely Holland is going to have quick hands, and I think could give Dolidze problems on the feet. Dolidze hasn't really evolved his striking game much since being in the UFC, although he does have a couple KO wins. He has that KO over Phil Hawes. But I think Dolidze will be able to run through Holland striking and be able to take this one to the ground. And Holland, I think he has underrated jiu-jitsu, although he does get taken down pretty easily. Once he's down, he's a hard guy to really have your way with him. He does have that submission win over Olajechuk most recently, but Dolidze, if this is a grappling match, I think Dolidze is going to win that 9 times out of 10. We're taking him to win this one. I think he can get a KO in this one. I really do. I think he can just smother Holland and get in one of those positions, maybe take his back and just hammer away until the ref stops it. Next fight, it is José Aldo taking on Mario Bautista. Obviously, any fight with Aldo in it is going to be incredible. Bautista, I think, has managed to really fly under the radar. The casual fan's not going to know who this guy is, and here he is fighting one of the most famous fighters of all time. This is his first fight as a ranked bantamweight. I think the UFC, after Aldo beat Jonathan Martinez, they're not going to rush him into a title shot, although I would have had really no problem with giving Aldo pretty much a number one contender eliminator bout right after that fight. He's got to get through Mario Bautista first. Bautista is on a 6-fight win streak, most notably with a win over Ricky Simon, where he showed really impressive striking. I think he's got better hands than Jonathan Martinez. He poses more of a grappling threat than Jonathan Martinez, who really wasn't able to get much wrestling going at all. Aldo, super tough guy to take down historically, but, does he still have that ability to fight off takedowns like he does before? I would think yes, but it's hard to really say because it hasn't been tested in quite some time. So I do think Bautista is a bigger challenge than Jonathan Martinez posed for Aldo, a tougher matchup. Aldo just looked incredible versus Jonathan Martinez, though. I can't really get that fight out of my head. Martinez, I don't know if his boxing really just isn't that great, but regardless, Aldo's hands look so clean. He was quick. He had a lot of power. He knew just when to strike and when to try and counterpunch, when to put the pressure on. He just looked so impressive. I think the time off really revitalized him. He's looking as good as, honestly, he ever has as a 135er. I am taking Aldo to win this one by a decision. Our co-main event, it is Raquel Pennington taking on Julianna Pena. Pena is coming for that bantamweight belt that she took from Amanda Nunes. Pennington obviously won the belt versus Mayra Bueno Silva in a pretty forgettable fight. I was pretty bored, but I did come away from that fight thinking that Pennington is the real deal. She doesn't have a whole lot of finesse, but she is just super relentless in the cage. She's always moving forward, it seems. Anytime Mayra Bueno Silva really tried to take her down, Pennington just finds a way to end up on top, which I think is going to be a really valuable skill versus Julianna Pena, who's going to want to mix the grappling in. I think she's going to be the better striker compared to Julianna Pena. I think she's going to have the cleaner hands. She's going to be landing more often. Obviously, Pena is going to look to make this a dogfight, which she is really good at. And I do think if they start mixing in the grappling a lot, Pena can make it interesting there. We saw Mayra Bueno Silva take Raquel Pennington's back. And if that was the case, I think if Pena got Pennington into a similar situation, it would have been much more dire for Raquel Pennington, who was able to sort of get out of those situations and never in too much trouble versus Mayra Bueno Silva. Really tough matchup here. I mean, I look at Raquel Pennington as just physically, her strength, and I think she's super strong, and Pena's going to have trouble with that when trying to grapple with her. When you keep constantly ending up on top of your opponent, that tells me that you're just bigger, stronger. So I could see Pennington dominating some of those grappling exchanges even on top of just winning this one on the feet. We're taking her to win this one by decision. It's going to go 25 minutes. Pena is super hard to put away, and Pennington doesn't really have that one-shot knockout power, but I think she will, over the course of 5 rounds, separate herself, especially on the feet. I would not be surprised if this fight ends up winning fight of the night, though. Julianna Pena, so exciting, and she's definitely not going to go away, so that one should be incredible. The altitude, I could definitely see that one, 25 minutes at altitude. It might end up being just whoever wants it more, in which case it's going to be a lot of fun. All right, our main event is Alex Pereira taking on Khalil Rountree for the light heavyweight championship. I know I was personally surprised when this fight was announced. There wasn't really a natural, this guy should be next, besides, probably Ankalaev should have been next, if we're being honest. Dana just does not mess with Ankalaev at all, probably after that stinker fight he put up with versus Jan Blachowicz back in the day. I do think Khalil has had one of the easier paths to a title shot in recent memory. Let's just look at the resume. Modestas Bukauskas blows his knee out. Carl Roberson, we haven't really heard from him since. Dustin Jacoby, who I thought he debatably could have lost to, super close fight. Chris Daukaus and Anthony Smith. So, really the thing that got him here was not the opponents he beat. It was the fashion in which he beat him, which was violent, destructive. Obviously, he had that walk-off KO versus Anthony Smith, who, Anthony Smith is still a tough dude. All that being said, this does feel like an ideal matchup for Alex Pereira on paper. He's taking on another striker. Rountree isn't going to grapple with him. Maybe he'll try and mess around the clinch a bit. If he does shoot a takedown, I don't even necessarily think that's a smart move for him, just because I think that's going to expend a lot of energy. I think Rountree's best bet is to just try and get Pereira up on the cage, get in close, and just try and land a strong shot. We know that he has power. I don't think anyone has matched up to Pereira's power quite like Khalil Rountree has to date. Even Jan Blachowicz, I don't think hits quite as hard as Khalil Rountree does. Going to be a super interesting matchup here. Pereira obviously is going to have the length. I think he's going to be just letting those leg kicks fly. Really frustrating Khalil Rountree, who's, going to be stuck between, hey, I want to get up close, but I have to worry about Pereira just smashing me coming in, and I can't really fight out far because I don't have the reach, and he's just going to pepper me with these leg kicks, and really I'm going to be in deep trouble there. So I think Rountree does have a path to victory here, which is accept that he's going to get hit and just try and find that one shot to put Pereira out. Pereira has been rocked. Obviously, in the first fight versus Adesanya, obviously put out cold in the second fight. And, Pereira does get hit, for as skilled and incredible as he is as a striker. People do find ways to land on him. He does kind of keep his hands a bit lower because he, wants to hit you from those bizarre angles. All that being said, I do think Pereira ultimately finds a KO in this one. He's got the power. I think what people don't talk about enough is his precision. He's the most accurate puncher maybe we've ever seen in the UFC. He just finds people's chins. It's really as simple as that. I think he adds another KO to his resume here versus Khalil Rountree. And that is the breakdown. Thank you all for listening. Like, comment, do all that stuff. We got some good cards coming up, obviously. Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway is in the not-too-distant future. A lot to talk about, a lot going on in the UFC world, and can't wait to keep talking about it. We'll catch you on the next one.